people start or don't start or start and quit early because they have a hard time with failure and imperfection. If you aren't clear on who you are, what you're about, and what you're working on, then every single influence, every single social media post you watch, every single conversation you get in, you're getting sucked into somebody else's plan. You're getting sucked into somebody else's vision. Money isn't always enough. Recognition isn't always enough. You need something deeper than that. You can get the recognition and money a lot of different ways.
Athan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Misbah. It's great to be on the show. I had such a great time last time, and I'm excited to do it again.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on because this context, a lot of what we like to talk about on Habit Chess is like the skill of learning how to learn. Because I feel like if you unlock that skill, it opens up so many other doors for you. And you are somebody that to me kind of demonstrates that. Like you have, I feel like, skill stacked your way into so many different into entrepreneurship, into what you do in the army, like all sorts of different worlds. Being able to navigate that is a craft and a skill. And so I kind of want to dive into how you mentally kind of organize some of these things in your brain to be able to make it happen.
Okay, yeah, great. I'd love to talk about that. I think you're right. I think when I tell people my story of my life, people are like, wait, how did you jump from that to that to that? And I
Yep.
think a common saying is how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think I just somehow figured the hacks out.
Right. Well, did you know when you got started in the business world and entrepreneurship, what your life kind of looks like today in terms of, operating multiple businesses and, just the journey that you've had? Did you kind of know that this is the direction that you wanted to go? Or has some of this been kind of, you stumbled upon it, or it kind of just, one thing led to another? How much of it do you feel like was intentional and planned?
I think being a business owner has always been an intention of mine. From a very young age, I was that kid crafting up ideas and ways to add value for other people that they would want to pay me for something. And so I think that has always been something that was exciting to me. Even in the Army, I was somewhat entrepreneurial through my, when I was active duty Army, and I've always kind of had that going on. But the actual types of businesses that I've owned, I didn't always know those were going to be the types of businesses, but I really can't ever imagine myself not being in business.
How was the first leap or first jump? Was it before your time in the Army that you got involved in the business world, or was it after, or sometime in the middle? At what point did you kind of, move from one world to another where you felt like, okay, this is a leap, this is different, but I'm going to kind of figure it out?
I mean, I had a lot of hustles going on, but I don't know that to me those felt like any kind of leap. It was always just like I mentioned, it was always just a way to, make some money or whatever. Even while I was in the Army, I ran a vending machine business. I would go fill up vending
Nice.
machines in different locations to fill them up. But that really didn't feel like a real business to me. It wasn't until I went to graduate school to be a social worker. And my very first job out of social work was creating this program that had never existed before inside of a law firm. And that's really the first, I would say, my first real go at a business. And that I had to learn and grow in leaps and bounds to make that happen.
What do you think helped you from, I guess previous life experiences and skills that you accumulated before you were kind of given that task to build out, inside the law firm? What skills kind of transferred over that you think kind of gave you an edge or helped you out? Because I'm sure you have a lot of friends, you've gotten to see people who have made transitions from one world to another. And, what makes that easier for some people, or allows that to click versus harder for others? Is there a skill that you feel like is responsible for that, or a set of skills?
Yeah, it's a skill and a mindset, I think. I was not very successful at hardly anything until I went into the army. Like I wasn't good at sports, I wasn't good at school. As a younger person, I there was no high expectations for me. And the reason why I bring that up now is because I think that people start or don't start or start and quit early because they have a hard time with failure and imperfection and a lot of those kinds of issues. So that's a mindset. It's like you're gonna suck at this, and you're not gonna get a lot of praise and all that stuff for a year, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years. So I think that's the first thing. That's more of a mindset than a skill. Just being okay with being a learner and a beginner. And then the skills really are, they come into play with how do you master anything? It's getting the reps in, practicing and practicing and practicing, no matter what it is, whatever type of business you're running or whatever aspect of your business you're trying to run. There's a whole lot of like practice that goes into that. And that really is a skill, is learning how to master something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, do you remember your first couple experiences with like, oh wow, this is a real challenge? Maybe it was inside the law firm, maybe it was another gig after, but like where you felt challenged, you kind of felt like, whoa, I don't know. I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing. Did you ever find yourself in that position, and how did you mentally kind of navigate that, and kind of keep your feet on the ground and, figure it out basically?
Yeah, I think I always feel like that. I kind of laughed when you started bringing that up because I'm in a constant stage, like of not really sure that I know what I'm
Right.
doing. I think that's just like a mode of life for me. I'm trying to recall a time when like was my first time feeling that way, where I was, I do think the law firm was the first time that I really felt like I was out of my depths. These folks had, so this, I'll give you the short version of it. This group of lawyers, and the two head lawyers were a husband and wife team. They took a real risk on me. They hired me right out of grad school. This was a position that I was expecting a salary for that they hadn't really budgeted for. There was a lot that was kind of on the line. And I had never really put together a well structured business plan that required like really having to think through the numbers and the budget and how do you scale something, like how do you start something from an idea of a pilot and grow it. And I remember multiple times, and I have my personality type is just kind of like wing it or fake it till you make it. I've always just kind of gotten by that way. And I remember sitting there thinking like I can't wing this. I can't fake this. And it took a lot of like honest conversations and asking for a lot of help and doing a ton of research and tapping into all the resources that I could possibly think of in order for me to get past that. And it was just in that moment, I really had a choice, like, in that, like, oh crap, I've maybe jumped into the deep end too soon. That moment, you can either quit, that's the opportunity where it's like, let me just back out of this and just go on my way, or you can make some choices that help you to get past it.
Yeah, you referred to this a little bit earlier where you feel like people quit early, like right before you're about to kind of strike gold or, make headway is kind of, it happens to be the moment where you're like, that was the last straw and you walk away. In your experience, because you have gotten to kind of, I would say, maybe start from scratch and build a lot of different sets of skills over the years, especially just because I feel like landscapes have changed and all sorts of things like that, right? Where you're constantly kind of learning and mastering new things. Have you found a time frame or time period, maybe it's even just for you personally, where you feel like, okay, around the 20-hour mark, the 100-hour mark, the 2 year mark, when I learn something new, that's when I begin to feel like, all right, I think I have an idea of what I'm doing. Um, have you noticed any patterns across all the different skills that you've kind of picked up over the years in terms of timing?
Yeah, I don't really think about it so I don't measure, like you mentioned, like, this number of reps or this number, I don't do a lot of this is kind of crazy to a lot of people that, when people are ask me questions, like I don't do a lot of um goal setting or metric measuring for a really intentional reason. And because I already know, and because I've gone through this so many times, I've had so many different iterations of kind of working through skills that um, that it's going to be really hard, and it's going to take a long time and a lot of perseverance. So my what I just make sure that everything I start before I start it, that it's tied to my personal purpose.
Hmm.
And that's how I make it through the perseverance, because the rewards and the pats on the back and the money and all these different things aren't always going to be there. So for me, the personal reward is that I'm doing this because this is part of who I am. This is part of like why I'm on this planet, and this is tied to a much bigger purpose. So the reason why I don't quit, and that's really, the real answer to that is like, why have I never quit when it got hard? Because I knew that this was something that I was supposed to be doing, and I already knew it was going to be hard, and I needed to push through.
Yeah, it's kind of like you eliminate all those issues by choosing something you care about in the first place, right? Because I think a lot of times what those challenges sometimes reveal is, oh, I didn't really, if you do walk away from it, right? You didn't maybe want it as bad as you thought you did, right? Or so I feel like for you doing the work up front to kind of go, is this tied to my purpose? Should I be spending my time on this anyways? That kind of that kind of makes it where, like you said, the metrics and the money, all these things might, ebb and flow and change, but like the work kind of still is there, right? Like the inputs that you're going to be kind of, needing to put in. So I feel like that's a interesting way to think about it. It also kind of reminds
Yeah,
me, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, I've just seen, and I've coached and like helped so many people who started, different types of endeavors, not just business, but started new things for the wrong reasons.
Mm.
And it was pretty clear to me in the beginning that that was true, and eventually they realized that. But like, money isn't always enough. Recognition isn't always enough. You need something deeper than that, and you can get the recognition and money a lot of different ways, but new endeavors are hard. So it's, you got to make sure that it's for a much bigger reason.
How has business changed over the years, the decades, just kind of since you've grown up and observed it from like oh, I want to be in that world, I want to be associated with it, to getting to be in that world, to then kind of getting to be kind of, very successful in that world? I'm sure there's a lot of common, things that have stayed pretty steady and are principles that have kind of stood the test of time. But because I know I feel this way sometimes when I look back even 5, 10 years ago, where you're like, wow, that's so crazy. Like, look how much has changed in 5, 10 years, or what's become available to us, right? That just wasn't even a thought before. For you looking back, kind of like, how has, in your eyes, business evolved from like when you were kind of doing the vending machine gig to like what you're working on now, and the types of tools you're using and things that are using compared to back then?
Yeah, I mean, that you nailed it. It's a mix of technology, and so with that technology has come all these different mediums and all these different platforms and all these different skill. Speaking of skill development, these are like skills that I never really had to worry about that much before. That you really, it's become so much more complex and and simple all at the same time. So it's kind of, we you've probably heard of like the research study where they studied like, they were trying to sell jelly in the grocery store, and then, at one table they had like three options of different types of jellies, like strawberry, grape, and I don't know, apple or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then at another table there was like 20 different options, all these different flavors, blueberry, raspberry, strawberry, you name it. And the one that sold the most was the one with only three jelly options versus the one that had like 20 jelly options. And the reason why I bring that up is because there's just so many different ways to express your business, to run your business, all these different softwares and platforms, and um, you know, there's different email tools, and just there's just it's overwhelming. That's the difference. Is back when I first started kind of getting into business, you had just a few options, like and you really had to like you didn't really have to think about that much. And now I struggle now more in business than I ever have for that reason, because there's so many tools and ways that people are getting information and hearing about your business that I really didn't even have to think about before.
It's almost like, do you also feel like there's new paths being developed? Like, I feel like maybe back then you saw people execute on certain paths where you're like, oh, okay, that's a way to do it that works, versus there's a period of time, maybe it was like 2010 to 2020 even, where it felt kind of like people are taking their chances, taking shots, but nobody fully knows if this is the right way, if this is going to work out. And for the people where it did work out, it was just kind of being confident in, and doubling down on something they believed in an era where I mean, even
Oh,
podcasting, I remember living through that period where it's just like nobody knows what it is. People are like kind of don't understand how it helps, with business or even, things like that. And now it's become a regular part of it, right? So, yeah, I find that interesting where there's newer, I'm sure there were newer paths back then also being developed, but it's like it's getting to the place where you can it really breaks your mind, like you can spend your time on anything really, which is why, coming back to what you mentioned earlier, like choosing something for the wrong reasons now, it's kind of like it slaps you back pretty hard, because you don't need to do that. There's so many things you could do, that why not just take the time to figure out what you want to do, versus going after something that seems like, quick and easy, when that problem isn't really there anymore. There's abundance in terms of all things you could do. And I guess, like you said, it's also overwhelming at the same time because of it.
yeah, and that's really the beauty of today's landscape is everything works. If you find something that really works for you, that you're going to persevere through, you're going to be persistent. You've seen many, many, many examples of people being highly successful when they and but when they first started that endeavor, people were like, "That's crazy, and that is never going to work." But I mean, in early in my career, YouTube was like and people would say, I'm going to be a YouTuber, I'm going to make money, and I'm going to be successful, or whatever their things. And,
Right.
that seemed crazy, absolutely crazy. And now, tons of people are doing that. So,
If there's one thing like I've noticed about that, because I remember that too, right? Where the YouTube thing, any medium, even Instagram, kind of had that point in culture where it felt like, what do you're gonna do Instagram? What do you mean, right? But it's very, do you notice how quick it is that we adapt to it, and it becomes kind of just not even a weird anymore? Like it goes from being really weird and like people make fun of it, or it's the joke, the butt of the joke in kind of culture. And by the time it kind of gets to that, where like in movies you're seeing people who are like, a scene is of the main character has a YouTube channel, and like they're setting up for that, or they're doing something there. By the time it reaches that point, it's like, oh, it's become normal. Like this is not as weird now. But I've noticed that that timeline is very strange. It goes from like almost really really weird to like overnight it goes, and it's like normalized, and everybody gets it now. What's been your feeling on that, just observing it?
yeah. And I mean, I've observed it time and time again with so many different, not just technologies, but just like, business ideas and I always encourage that, right? Because I think that like when someone, if you really want to do something, if you really love it and you're like feeling just completely pulled to that thing, I encourage people to dive into those, because that's you might find the next thing that really pops.
Yeah.
And so just because no one else has done it before, I think it's not a good reason for you to not do it. And yeah, to your point, um, it's almost overnight. I mean, how quickly something can go from being a ridiculous and horrible idea to being like, oh, I need to figure out how to do this because now
Yeah,
everyone's doing it.
right.
You know?
Yeah, you're right. I think that happens with it, with not just tech, but just even like the culture of remote work, right? I remember the years where remote products, remote services, remote companies even were very novel. Like it was not as big of a thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's totally mainstream, and everybody like even the word remote is used just way more and understood versus it kind of, I remember a period where remote coaching, like that was a very novel sounding concept where you had to kind of explain what it was. And so I'm curious now if you look back to kind of brick and, because you have had the chance to run multiple like brick and mortar physical businesses. What have you noticed is kind of different, right? When you look now at some, comparing to like digital or tech related businesses, right? Versus the physical brick and mortar ones. What have you noticed that is different, harder, better, easier, in just kind of being involved in a bit of both?
Yeah, I mean, I have always struggled with online types of business myself. I've tried multiple stabs at doing an online version of my businesses, and I've always struggled with it because I find it hard to build community and connection, which I find that's one of parts of my purpose and one of my talents is I can bring people together around ideas, concepts, issues, and build connection. And I think that that's what I find to be easier about the brick and mortar part. When if I can provide something that gives them a good enough reason to kind of show up, like more than, one or two people to show up, I can kind of build community and connection and bonding. And there's some people who are super talented at doing this out there in the world, online or remotely. But that's something that I've really struggled with. And truly it's something, I was actually one of those people who's like, I'm not going to do the online business things, or that's not for me. And now like I mentioned, I took a couple stabs at it, but I just haven't been successful at it because I haven't really been able to translate that piece into it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I feel like it's in some ways your message state like is more valued in person sometimes. Like I've talked about, let's say the exact same thing if you put it out on a loudspeaker on Instagram, right? Versus if you took it to the right room of 30 people at like a little conference or something like that, and like just the difference in like people's eyes lighting up, people coming up to you afterwards, and like it just feels like there's a line out the door to like talk to you and help them. And it really does, like it can be, because there's so many people, I think, online, and coming back to that overwhelm even of tools and ways to do things, that's kind of where it becomes difficult, is like in a physical space it's kind of like, oh, you're here, I'm there, there's a mile radius around us, like there's, you can kind of conceptualize it a little bit easier, I feel like, versus it just feels like an endless sea of, you know uh just just unlimitedness when you think about the internet a lot of times.
Yeah, I think that nailed it for me. Hearing, listening to you talk while you were saying that, I think because as a consumer, I have a harder time, like, pulling the trigger on an online service or reaching out to somebody online. And I think what it really comes down to is trust.
Mm,
I think that people assume that if you've gone through all the effort and spent all the money and all those things to build a brick and mortar type business, that you somehow have some sort of credibility, or at least you're probably less likely to be fraudulent or anything. Not always
yes.
true, but I think that there's a level of kind of credibility and trust that people will kind of like grant you without even knowing you because of the brick and mortar type of business, um, which is unfortunate in a lot of ways because there are so many credible, talented, highly skilled people out there who are just smart. Because obviously, one of the most expensive part of a brick and mortar business is the actual infrastructure itself, like what you have to pay
Right.
for rent and all the stuff. And so, some really smart people are choosing not to go that route. And I think where they sometimes might flop or really struggle is to get people to trust them enough. to buy into their business.
Totally. Um, yeah, I was gonna say I had this experience with like when you're kind of call when you need a local service, right? And you actually kind of make the calls down the list on Google listings or whatever. It is actually surprising, despite, you know, like great reviews and all that kind of stuff, how, you know, it's not that hard. I feel like it's easy to stand out in a brick and mortar physical space business because some people just don't like the basics of customer service or like you know what I mean, like answering the phone
Yeah,
like in a positive way or there's just all sorts of funny stories that you come across over the years where you're like, wow, how are you still in business, you know? And it's like this is
yeah,
just the way. It's almost inspiring though because you go, wow, like you can be that way, or you could, you know, have these flaws maybe in this way, but there's still a place for you, there's still a market for you, clearly. But I feel like there's a real opportunity with in-person businesses to kind of create an atmosphere, you know, which you don't get that
yeah.
much in a lot of places. Like gyms are a great example where you do get that, I feel, because it's like, you know, people spend a lot of time there, there's a sense of community that's built there, it's not just kind of like a quick stop and go type thing like maybe a fast food place or something like that.
Yeah, you spend some time, that type of, why did I gravitate towards that type of business? And that's really it, right? Like you spend some time there, you partake in a difficult process, and that there's this opening up of yourself. There's this letting go of yourself that happens in a business like that I think isn't always possible with other types of businesses, and
Yeah.
it creates a different challenge.
Talk to me about when you kind of first stumble, like began to become well versed in the art of management or delegation, kind of the leadership side of business. Because,
Hmm.
you know, I know you like you run a gym, and one of the examples that kind of come to mind for me is when the main person who runs the gym becomes kind of like the main character. Everybody wants to go to that coach's classes, everybody wants kind of their time, right? There's almost this moment where it's like to get all of the other coaches or other people that are working there, your job at a certain point almost becomes like getting people like to feel good about working with some of the other folks, because like you can't do it all forever. How have you handled
Yeah,
that part? Where did you figure that out early, or did you get bit a couple times and then, you know, you had to delegate?
yeah. I tell people all the time. Well, to answer the first part of the question, I think the real leadership skills that I attained, I was really lucky to be under the wing of some like really talented and well educated leaders in the military, and so I really got some like great structure and tips there. But I really, going back to the second half of what you just mentioned, I really struggled with that part of it, because the truth is it, and this took some insight and some introspection and a whole lot of falling flat on my face, that the real reason why I originally started getting into business and doing any of these like kind of big, wild, crazy things was because, I had a low self esteem. I had a low, I didn't really feel great about me and who I was. So I did these things to be like, look at me, look how great I am, look how much I can help you, and um, look at how important I am, and that was a really horrible trait to have going into business for the things that you just talked about. Like I was not good at delegating. I really felt like I had to put on a show and be on center stage all the time in my business, and I became enslaved to it. And it wasn't until I really had a few crash and burn moments where like um I would fall into a depressive state and I couldn't get out of bed, and those kinds of things would happen, until I finally realized that part that you just said was like, I can't do all of this. And if I want this vision and this mission and this dream to happen, um, I've got to I've got to find a different way. I've got to let go of some of this. And then I had to ask the question why. That's when I
Hmm.
realized all this self-esteem issues that I was having, and of course had to address that.
Yeah, how do you now, like, because I'm sure that was maybe a different point where you're not running maybe as many businesses, right? But you've run like, and maybe you are still are like multiple businesses at once, right? Maybe in different
Hmm.
spaces, different, uh, like different objectives, different everything. How do you mentally kind of compartmentalize that for each business, or how do you look at it to where it doesn't stress you out maybe as much as it would somebody who's just like, dude, Athan, how do you this sound like this is a lot, how do you keep this all in your head? I feel like entrepreneurs have something in their brain that allows them to take in a lot of information and like put it somewhere where it's not just like, you know there's a lot of chaos, but it's controlled. And so what's your kind of way to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to, I recently picked up this term, but I was using it before. This is just a great way to say it. It's like who, not how. When
Mm.
you get the right people in the right spots and empower them to pull out their talents and everything, then really, I mean, that's, and what I try to tell as many people as I possibly can is, all these amazing things that you see come out of my businesses and like all the success that come out of those businesses, I don't really deserve any of that credit. I found some amazing people who are super talented, and I've been smart enough to put them in the right positions and get out of their way. And I think that that's really how I've been able to run many multiple businesses at the same time, all to a high level of success, is because it's not about, once I realized it wasn't about me, and I just pulled myself out of the equation, then it's easy from there, you know.
Right. I feel like similarly, like that phrase of how, controlled chaos, right? You feel like, I mean, you got exposed to that in the army in a variety of different ways. Like,
Hmm.
how much impact do you think that had on you to be able to like just kind of keep your cool or stay calm in the face of pressure? I think that's kind of what the word pressure. How do you deal or handle pressure, and do you still feel it after all of these years, or have you figured out some way where it doesn't hit you as hard at times?
Yeah, I think, that's a really, I think that's a part of conditioning. I read the book. I'm going to mess up his name now, but Buy Back Your Time.
Oh,
Is it
Dan
Dan,
Martell.
Dan Martell? Yeah, I think
Martell,
it's
yeah.
his name. And anyway, he in his book was like, a lot of successful entrepreneurs like grew up in these like kind of chaotic, like stressful childhoods, and that's how
Hmm.
mine was. So I think that is so for folks who had a more peaceful, kind of calm, upbringing, I think they're going to really have to, as an adult, start to kind of embrace and be a little bit more okay with like the chaos, because you're 100% right. Running a business or running multiple business is chaos, and
Yeah.
there's problems everywhere, and you have to kind of have some sort of tolerance to that. And so my childhood was like that. Going into the army felt fine to me. A combat situation or like a super stressful course that you were going through, any of that didn't feel hard at all to me because that was just normal.
Wow.
So yeah, so I think that because I don't want to sit here and say you either have it or you don't. I think
Hmm.
for those folks who struggle with chaos, you're gonna one have to develop some tolerance and accept that as part of it, and then you're probably gonna have to find some ways to really control and keep the chaos to a minimum, which isn't something that I ever try to do. Um, I just accept the chaos, and I'm okay with the imperfection that kind of comes with that because I have the perseverance to kind of push. I know that it's not going to end me or break me, you know.
Do you have can you recall, was it, certain things in your training in the army, certain tools that you tap into, certain techniques that allow you to invite it and accept it. What do you feel like somebody who is in that camp, maybe they're developing that, right? What would you say to them as some like a mode of like a mindset that you can maybe take with you during those high pressure, high chaos circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's many things that helped me to get through those, and those are all things that can be adapted by anyone. It is somewhat of a mindset, I think. One of those is, and this really got me through a lot of like, a simple example is like airborne school. I'm terrified of heights. As many times as I've jumped out of airplanes, you would think that I wasn't afraid of heights, but I'm terrified of heights. And the thing that got me through that type of situation and many others is, look, if if think about all the people who have done this before you. I mean, there are so many people who've done all these. None of this stuff is new. No, business isn't new. Any crazy situation that you're in, probably at a minimum, thousands of people have gone through a similar situation. But most likely, if you think about all the time, all the human history, I mean, so many people have gone through similar situations like that. So, like, why can't you? Like, why do you think that you can't make it through this situation? So that's kind of been a mindset that it's always pulled me through. Um, the other one is just, you the the quitting part of it, and it kind of, you talked about this way early in the episode, and it really kind of like was driven home for me in The Alchemist. But people always just quit at the wrong time. Like
Mm-hmm.
they quit in the moment of the worst suffering and like the hardest part, and that's like the absolute worst time to quit something. You kind of want to get to the next morning, or you want to get to the next phase, and then you can decide if you want to quit or not. But I think just kind of like pushing your way through that really difficult, dark time is just that's the goal anyway. So yeah, I think that's a couple of things that I've used to get through all the craziness.
It's interesting you say that because I've recently been reading more, not like straight up history, but like books that have historical elements, like, Ryan Holiday's books on Stoicism
Hmm.
contains history, right? Robert Greene has a lot of historical stories in his writing. And it reminded me of something that, like, it's been over 10 years that I heard this, and it didn't make sense until, like, I would say a month ago, where somebody was like, "Oh, you should read history." I forget if it was in the morning or at night, but it was biographies and history and things like that, and I never really remembered the reason that was given behind it, but it made sense when I was kind of going through it, and what you just said, which is when you kind of read a history, especially in the morning, like the first thing in the morning, kind of before you go on autopilot with like everything you've got going on, there it like kind of snaps you out a little bit of, the the uniqueness that you feel that you're experiencing in today's time. When you even see something that's like a thread similar to what you're going through, and it's like in this crazy historical context, maybe 100 years ago or hundreds of years ago, there's something I feel like it does to your brain that makes you kind of zoom out a little bit, even if it is just reading it's like it's not like I read a whole historical book. It's like it could be half a page sometimes, but here seeing a problem being dealt with in a old time situation like that, I feel like has some effect to make you go like, why not me? If they could do it, or they figured it out despite all the craziness.
Yeah, I mean, history is just full of all of these like regular average Joe folks like you and I, who have done all these amazing things. I'm reading Ryan's book right now, Right Thing Right Now, on
Mm-hmm.
justice, and he's just got example after example of all these just not particularly smart, not particularly educated, not particularly anything like high level of anything. These people just doing having examples doing amazing things. in their lives. And that, yeah, I agree. That gives hope, right? That you can totally, whatever the problem that's sitting in front of you, it's really the difference is your mindset. Do you want to finish this? Did you get into this for the right reasons? It's easy to quit stuff when you got into something for the wrong reasons. you know the first opportunity out, you're gonna bounce, right? But if you're getting into something that you really want to do and you're there for the right reasons, then the only option is just to keep moving forward.
Do you have a process for pressure testing yourself or pressure checking yourself on that kind of thing? Because I feel like you have a very good, you're in touch with kind of what your purpose is, what's important to you. Have you, was this something you did a long time ago that, or things that happened to you that maybe revealed that to you? What for you kind of set in stone? What I feel like, I take some time to kind of revisit and come back to it from time to time and kind of check, like, this is still important, right? Or how has this evolved? How has this changed? And I'm curious how that happened for you, because you seem very, like secure and strong in what's important to you, which I think is the foundation for all of this, right? Because it prevents you from doing things for the wrong reasons because you're so sure about, the things that you're doing. So what's your process for kind of evaluating that? Am I being truthful and honest with myself, or am I doing this for the wrong reasons?
Yeah, I well, it was a process that didn't happen overnight, but again, I think all the things that I've carried forward, I learned, in the military. And one of the things that I learned very early on as a ranger, the first thing you start doing is memorizing what they call the Ranger Creed. And it's essentially the kind of like expectations of how you're supposed to carry yourself as a ranger. And if you, at any moment, if someone who outranked you asked you to recite the Ranger Creed, you had better be able to say it without hesitation, and you better not mess it up, or there would be consequences. And so, taking that all the way forward, at some point in entrepreneurship, I kind of realized that I didn't have that. I had been missing. I had basically just been reciting the Ranger Creed to myself for all those years, which didn't really apply to like what my new mission in life and my new purpose in life. So I sat down one day and I basically kind of like started drafting up um, what I considered to be kind of like my own personal creed and document. And ever since that day, I either read or listen to myself reading. Sometimes, like if I'm on the road or whatever, I've recorded myself, but I read that document to myself every single day in the morning, the first
Wow.
thing, because that's how clear, and it's changed over time. So I will say that it's a living document that sometimes I guess over time I'm like, yeah, this doesn't fit anymore. I need to change this wording, or I need to change this. So it's not a static thing that I've just wholeheartedly wholesale accepted as truth, but it's a document that I've now tweaked and modified and carried with me as a daily practice. So in terms of habit chess, that's something that I'm always trying to get people to do. And it doesn't mine is long, and because I'm long-winded, right? That's kind of how I
Hmm.
am. But I just always encourage people to have something, if it's 5 words about you, about who you are and how you want to show up in this world and what matters to you, then you should look at those every single morning as a part of just like brushing your teeth. It should be that habitual for you.
It's so funny that you mentioned this, because a few months ago I did this for myself, realizing that it's almost like there's so much data and information coming at you that, and at every turn, at every click that you try to make, that it's like, if you don't create one for yourself, it is really created for you. It's like you kind of just are chasing and following whatever else is being coming your way. And even if you figured out, like, let's say you did this session and you're like, yep, this is what's important to me, it's actually kind of easy to like forget a day later or 7 days later, like, which is why I like the concept of like looking at it. You don't like even just kind of glancing at it at the beginning of the day or at some point in the day, like there's something your brain does to go, oh right, that is important, right? And it kind of like steers your focus back in the right direction, the same way that something can steer your focus out of direction, like if you see the
Yeah.
wrong post or the wrong whatever. Talk to me about the memo part of it that you mentioned, because I think that's really interesting. Like, do you record you? Is it a voice memo? How do
Yeah.
you kind of how does that work for you?
Yeah. So at one point, I realized like my time was limited, and so I was always like bouncing between something. And but I was really so there would be days when I didn't read my thing, and that's when things started to kind of go badly for me. I kind of would, my life things would start happening in my life, or I would start making decisions that I wasn't exactly proud of, or whatever. Um, so I found a way to like never have an excuse, and all I did was every time I've written a new version of it because it has changed over time. I just take the voice memo app on my phone that comes on every iPhone, and I assume Androids have something similar. And I just record myself reading it. And that way, wherever I'm driving, I can always put it on I can always put it in my car, or I can put my headphones on. And that there's really no excuse for me to not have reminded myself of who I am and what I'm about.
I really like that. I think it's kind of like getting, I'm sure it's funny here because most people don't hear themselves very often, like in that format, right? Where you're like on a recording and you're speaking to yourself. You've designed it that way. So I'm sure there's something that's happening there where it hits extra hard. It's like you could glance at it or you could kind of, it's almost like getting a download into your brain, like a reminder
Yeah.
by playing this track, like an
Yeah. And
anthem almost.
I think that the challenge with it is, you know, you you drift off, you start
Yeah.
thinking, you're not picking up every word of it, but you kind of come in and out of it, and each if you're listening to it every single day, or if you're reading it every single day, you know, you're not, I guess, absorbing all 100% of it every day, but because you're doing it every day, you are getting all of it eventually over a period of time. And that's really the most important part, you know, always coming back to home.
I think so. I think you're right. It's kind of like if you, whenever you start a workout, like after, if you've been working out for 3 months or, a year, at a certain point at the beginning of that workout, it kind of is like a point where you check in with yourself and you can feel like, oh, I feel a little bit more beat up than yesterday's session. Or I feel like it's kind of like an anchor that you can rely on. Like this warm up happens every time I work out.
Right.
Right. And so it's kind of like developing that type of familiarity where you come back to it so often that it just is like like you said, brushing your teeth type of thing where it's just a part of your routine.
Yeah. And I think, to use the brushing your teeth example, like you said, because you brush your teeth every single day, you feel something like, oh, that kind of hurt today. Like there's something wrong with my
Yeah,
gums or my
right.
teeth. You kind
Yeah.
of, you kind of like notice it because it's so regular to you, when something's not right, you know?
Yes. Yep. I wanted to make sure to tap into this concept that I heard you talk about when we, first chatted. And it didn't hit the same as maybe now for whatever reason. Like the word means something different, or it's my brain has added more context to what it is. But the word self-actualization, tell me what that means to you and where it kind of came from, because that I feel like is a root word when I think of Athan. That's kind of something you stand behind.
Yeah. That's, that term to me is, it's just so massively important. And I borrowed that from Maslow, right? Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The lowest rung is like physiological needs, and it goes through multiple others, and safety, and then eventually the very top one is self-actualization. So when I first started kind of learning psychology and stuff, it was always just in my mind, like, okay, this is the pinnacle, this is the end goal, is self-actualization. But I didn't really fully get what that meant, until I really kind of sat with it and examined it. And for me, self-actualization just really means being self-led. being fully expressed as who you are, and and not being highly influenced by what you're not. And because like what you mentioned earlier is, I think, really poignant, and a big part of this conversation is that if you aren't clear on who you are, what you're about, and what you're working on, then every single influence, every single social media post you watch, every single conversation you get in, you're getting sucked into somebody else's plan. You're getting sucked into somebody else's vision. And who was it who said, I don't know, one of the ancient philosophers was like, for he who knows no harbor, every wind is the right wind. And
Mm,
that's really what it's about for me. It's like being a pillar of strength, knowing who you are, what you're about, and really being self-led through the whole process. That doesn't mean, it doesn't mean like, some people will be like reaching your full potential, like, but I
yeah,
don't really, potential is a really hard thing to measure, and a really hard, I don't know, a really tough goal, right? But
sure.
just being self-led, being fully expressed, and being clear on who you are and how you want to be versus in contrast to how other people are, is my version of self-actualization.
I really like the addition of self-led because I think that's the first time I've heard it that way, but it resonates because I feel that that is a skill. That's a skill totally nowadays. I feel because you, you kind of naturally have heroes and people you look up to and people you admire, right? Like if you get into golf, like you're gonna watch the top golfers and you're gonna, love the people who are crushing it, right? If you get into any interest, the same thing kind of happens. And I feel like that's great because you can, stand on the shoulders of giants, you can learn from others who have come before you and all that kind of stuff. But there's also this like trust in yourself that's kind of missing and that takes time, like it takes time to develop, I think, to where it's like you don't need somebody at all times to tell you this is the move, this is your right move. You can kind of trust your instinct, like is this the right move? And I don't know, maybe that was more common like 10, 20, 30 years ago. I don't know. To me, the thing I think about is like heroes can fall in like 2024, right? It's like for a long time I feel like you kind of just like whoever your hero is, there's a limited amount of documentation information on them, right? But in today's time, it's like there's this new story, there's a new, piece of media, like at all times on everybody, and
Yeah.
so there is this thing of like, oh, like this isn't the person I thought it was, right? Like the heroes do have downfalls, and so when they do, when if and when your heroes do you feel like you can kind of still trust yourself in their
Yeah.
absence? I feel like that's a new thing that we haven't had to really navigate as often.
Yeah, I think so too, because like information is just so readily available, and it's so easily manipulated, and
Yeah.
Michael Easter's writing about scarcity brain, in his one of his more recent books, that really drove home, because people now, information in the ways that we consume it, like on the internet and social media and everywhere else, is really just a platform to sell ad space, and so that means the more sensational and the more juicy and the more dirty or whatever,
Right.
the better. And so then, to your point, we're being influenced and then distracted from people and things and issues at a constant rate. And so it's really easy to feel lost and, let down and confused, and so that's why my version of self-actualization is like so important to me. I want to be knowing that I am the one who is sitting behind the screen, who I am the one who is even sitting behind my thoughts, that there's something behind that is driving the ship, versus just the mass chaos that's coming at us on a daily basis. And because on an island, Tom Hanks sitting on an island with a volleyball is easy to be self-actualized because there's no one else around to,
Right.
you have no option. But in our normal lives and in our day and age, it's extremely, extremely, minute to minute, it's difficult to be, fully self-actualized.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I was going to ask you, this is kind of on the back of, finding focus, calm in chaos, right? If you were to take that same concept, I feel like you could apply it to, like, how do you, somebody could look at someone like yourself who's running multiple businesses, doing all these things, has a lot of success, right? And go, man, how do you sleep at night, right? And you've probably heard that question of like, how you how are you sleeping is a better question even sometimes than how are you,
Yeah.
right? Because if someone's like, you're right, it's like
Yeah.
that's a big signal in terms of like how someone's doing. How do you, and it's funny because that is the thing that, I'm sure you like, there's times where you've got to, sacrifice sleep and focus on the mission at hand or whatever's in front of you. But it is also this need that is like, no matter who you are, if you don't get enough of it or you have a couple bad nights in a row, it gets to you and impacts you. How do you look at that, especially just, over the years in different contexts, dealing with different stresses? How do you manage, you know, peace when it comes to sleep and your ability to kind of you protect that?
Yeah, I used to struggle with that a lot. And really for me it comes down to a couple of things that I've already mentioned. The first thing that I sleep great nowadays. I don't lose any sleep over anything. And a large part of it is because there's nothing that's going on in my day-to-day life that is going to cause me to lose my sense of self. It's not going to make me change how I feel about me or about what I'm doing or what my purpose in life is. And so things can go pretty badly, and they do in in business and everything else. Things can go pretty badly, and I don't feel like that whole part of my life could collapse, and I would be okay because I don't feel like it's that tied to how I feel about me. And I think that's a large part of it. And the other part of it is, you know, um, there's really nothing, there's no defeat. Like I learned now because I've taken enough L's in life, I've been knocked
Hmm.
down enough time that there's really nothing that's going to end up being like a defeat or anything that you're going to come across that is stronger than you, that is going to be more enduring. There's nothing that's not recoverable. So I don't really stress about it. And to you use the sleep example. So like there is not one thing that I'm worried about in my life that is more important than how I feel about my health and my fitness and my ability, because I know that that is the tool, that is I am my platform for my ability to deal with chaos and stress and like painful and difficult moments. So if I'm not prioritizing sleep, fitness, nutrition, those kinds of things, then I'm a complete disaster. So um, that takes a really high priority for me.
You mentioned kind of the ability to almost detach a little bit, right? Where it's like
Mm-hmm.
you do care about it, but you can also kind of separate yourself from it, to some extent. Was that always the case, or was that different? Especially in those moments you mentioned where you were like, the low self esteem, those periods where you were driven by that. How was your relationship with being detached or attached to the outcomes back then compared to maybe now?
Oh yeah. Um, Again, this is learned through crashing and burning and like what I would consider some failures because um, you know I was majorly connected to outcomes and how things looked and what the thoughts of others for a very long time. But after you've kind of like gotten burned by the fire enough times and you've gotten really clear on some things, for me now, I actually, my one of my managers who runs the gym, the one who kind of runs the show for me, especially I'm here on military orders. Um, I tell her all the time, like, I love problems. Like there's something about having problems that I really get excited about. And if I didn't have those problems and challenges, I probably wouldn't like the business as much. I wouldn't be that excited about it because I've fallen so much in love with the process and I don't really care about the outcome as much. And that little flip flop in like what I really care about the most has made, everything easier. Like I said, even sleeping at night is because I'm cool with being in this process. I'm actually enjoying this process.
Do you think that you enjoy the welcoming of problems now that you are kind of like better at dealing with them? You're better at solving problems. So it's kind of like almost a little more like, oh, I'm curious, what could it be this time? Or,
Yeah.
what shape is it taking? Like you feel more confident in dealing with it. Does that kind of shift your attitude about it and compared to maybe how it was before?
Yeah, because before, early on, in my career or any of these endeavors, I really thought this was the end. Like if I don't fix this problem, my whole world is going, this whole part of my life is going to blow up in my face and it's going to be the end. But I kept waking up and like it never was the end. So after,
Right.
and so after some time, you just kind of realize that it's like, yes, this sucks. Yes, we're going to, things break and issues happen, but it's not going to kill you. Like quite literally, it's not going to kill you. So you always have hope. And second to that, it never kills the business either. For a business to die, you have to purposely kill it. And
Mm,
and I'm committed to what I'm doing, so I just know that now I get excited about the problems. It gives me something to do every day, you know.
I love that. What would you say to if you had to arm like young Athan, let's say coming up in 2024, trying to take your run at entrepreneurship, do everything kind of you did, but again, what piece of advice do you think you'd arm Athan with for business, for entrepreneurship, that you think, you know, would stand the test of time, that hasn't changed and maybe won't change, or that you wish maybe you had somebody to tell you or that you considered, when you were going through it the first round?
Um, there are so many things that I would tell a younger version of myself. I actually write a letter to myself every single day. Sometimes it's a younger version of myself. Sometimes it's a child version of myself. Sometimes it's me like now. But that's
Mm-hmm.
part of my journaling practice is just writing a letter to myself. Um, and what would be the most important things that I could tell younger Ethan going into some big things? I think the first one is like you're loved. You are worth something. You have value, and you're loved, no matter what happens with what you're about to go into. You don't have to attach your self worth and your identity to all this shit. And the other thing I would I wish I had figured out my purpose. Like I wish I had, because I chose my purpose. I don't think that I had a predetermined, like at birth, this is like what Ethan was going to be. I chose my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I had chosen my purpose, like with a clear mind and like some real introspection at a much, much younger age. It would have,
Mm.
I would have made some much like different decisions, in life. Um,
So doing the work to find your purpose in the first place, you'd encourage that
yeah,
earlier.
much earlier. I wish an
I
adult
love that.
or somebody else, some sort of mentor or somebody, my I did have purposes, but they were like given to me from somebody else. Like here's what you should be
Mm.
doing. Here's what I want you to do. And I never actually picked one
Yep.
for myself, and was self-led and
Right.
self-driven in that. And I wish that I had figured that out earlier.
Yeah, I love that. And I also like that practice of kind of writing, like while you're journaling, anyways, you're kind of switching the time period of which when you might be speaking to yourself. Like it might be from 20 years ago, might be from today, might be from 10 years ago. How long have you been doing that? And have you found that to be kind of effective? I'm assuming it is if you're still doing it in
Yeah.
some way.
I'd say I probably picked that up maybe like 5 to 8 years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but in my effort to be self-led, I also want to be my own coach and my own mentor and my own parent and my own guide. And so, and even still with all this stuff, I struggle emotionally. I have hard days. I feel bad about myself all the time. And so through those struggles that I write these letters to myself, and it does it changes my whole day,
Yeah.
instantly. It changes my whole mindset.
It's interesting how it's connected to the self-led thing too, because it's kind of like you already kind of know the answer, but you're putting it on the page, and you giving yourself a chance to even put it on the page is what kind of makes it seem like it's legit in the first place versus kind of just thinking it,
Yeah.
like when you see like that whole process of putting it down and reading it back or just reading it while you're writing, I feel like does something to how you hear it versus just thinking the exact same thought, for
Yeah.
example.
Well, you have to organize the words enough to like put it into a coherent message. And that even
Yep.
that practice is really helpful and effective. The other thing that I do is I like to go back and read like I'll randomly flip through, I'll grab an old journal, I'll randomly
Oh,
flip
that's
through it,
good.
and I'll just find one and I'll read it. And I'm like, oh man, I needed that today. I needed that
Yeah,
bit of encouragement today.
because that is not done as often, I feel like, as people write and journal all the time, including me, but to go back and to go revisit something, it like that isn't built in as much of a practice for people, which I feel like even for myself I'd benefit a ton from. Just kind
Yeah.
of like, what was I thinking back then? Even just taking yourself back to that moment in time, even if it was 2 days ago, there's something to it because you're viewing it from just a different vantage point. Like you might be feeling completely the opposite now, or it might still be there and affirm something. So
Yeah.
I really like that as kind of a built-in practice.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun thing to do. And one, it sometimes, like you mentioned, it shows me how much I've grown. I'm like, oh, look at what I was dealing with back then, compared to what I'm dealing with now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the other part of it is sometimes it also um, it it lights a fire under me because it's like, Athan, you were still talking about this 7 years ago. Like why haven't
Yep.
you fixed this? And sometimes it's that splash of water that I need, you know?
I feel the exact same way about that. You're like, wow, I can't believe I wrote this or thought this exact same thing 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you have a podcast called Doing the Work. Tell me because I really love some of the conversations that you share on there because you kind of, you get on a podcast, you kind of get to hear what someone's really interested in, the types of things they really care about. Um, and you break the mold for me in terms of like just like a Jocko or like a David Goggins, right? Like in my experience, everybody that I have met over the years that has been involved with or associated with the military in any way has been so kind to me that I've always kind of been intrigued and interested. Like, wow, like what makes up this person? Like they respect me more than they need to. Like there's just a an attitude about people in the military that I really appreciate. And so I love seeing some of those conversations, just you conduct them, who you're interested in, what you're interested in, what for you was the um, you know what for you is the goal with the podcast, what for you kind of pulled you towards even doing it, because I think it gives people a great glimpse into maybe another side of you that they may not get to see in the gym or in just day to day in passing.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the podcast has always been and continues to be my opportunity to learn from other people. So I really approach it with a humility where it's like I know that every single person that I meet has something to offer, has something an area for me to grow from or something to offer. And so that's how I think about the podcast. Like I really, it's really people going along with me, learning things that I care about and that I'm interested, or even like holes in my game that I'm trying to fill. And you get to kind of follow me along on that journey. And one thing that I'm super excited about that you just helped me with was now building in Ikigai. Hopefully, I'm saying that right, into like how I'm picking the topics and the people who get on there, because it's really helped me to reorganize and think about that learning journey and how I want to explore it.
Yeah, I really like how because it's almost like you never got to see smart people like learn after they're smart. You know, you normally just hear kind of them in a position of they're teaching you something, they're lecturing you about something, they're being recognized for something. But I think podcasts are really cool in that way, where it's like somebody as established and experienced and successful as yourself, you get to see you learning in real time about all of
Yeah,
these different things. And that's kind of a rare position. Like, people don't put themselves in that position as much as you would think, and so it's really cool that podcasting encourages that inherently. Like, bring
totally.
what you're unsure about, bring what you want to learn about, and so that's part of, I think, what makes your show cool. It's like to get to see your quest for learning happening in real time. It is fun to watch from afar.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And you've obviously been a major part of that through the journey, and so I'm super grateful for you to kind of help me figure all that out.
Of course, honored to help. Where can we point people to who want to kind of keep up with the show, keep up with what you're doing? Where are you hanging out online these days, and where can we point people to?
Yeah, right now, I think if you want to see what I'm up to, especially like if you start following me over the next 6 months or so, my YouTube channel is really where I'm trying to get everybody to come check out what I'm doing. So if you Google Athan Schindler YouTube, it will pop up, and that's really where I'd love people to come hang out with me. Then other place would be my Instagram, Athan Schindler. If you just search, it's just at Athan Schindler. That's where I'll be putting a lot of stuff out there too.
Perfect. I will make sure to get all of that linked up in the show notes. But thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate you taking the time. I feel like I picked up a lot today that I'm going to be revisiting as well. So thanks again. This was really fun.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And yeah, I just appreciate it.
Of course, man. I'll talk to you soon.